Fire that veteran. Customers don't need nightmares. No one defended him until 3 Marines walked in. Part 1. Fire that veteran. When humiliation became a public spectacle, if I have to look at that freak another second, I'll lose my appetite. Fire him now. The words ricocheted off the limestone walls of the Liberty Corner diner like gunfire in a cathedral. The diner nestled just outside downtown Helena, Montana, where the mountain wind howls through old timber streets and church bells still ring on Sundays fell into stunned silence. Pause a second. If you had been there sitting by the big bay window with the light slicing through your iced tea, would you have said something? Would you have helped? Or would you have pretended not to hear like most did? Comment below. Tell me what you would have done. The man who spoke was Commissioner Rick Halberd, a polished political veteran with an ice blue suit and colder eyes. He was seated at table 3 beneath a hand-carved wooden plaque that read, "Welcome home, veterans." He didn't even glance at the man he'd just condemned. He didn't need to. Power gives you that privilege. That man, the one they called a freak, was William Eugene Ashford, 53, former Marine Corps Staff Sergeant, Fallujah survivor, Bronze Star recipient. He had been working at Liberty Corner for just under 6 months. 6 months of rolling silently from counter to coffee station, of folding napkins into perfect triangles, of earning nods but never eye contact. William's wheelchair creaked on the old pine floor as he turned toward the source of the voice. He was wearing his usual faded denim shirt tucked into worn olive khakis. His combat boots, well-shined despite the missing leg, sat neatly beneath his seat. His face, partially burned from a 2004 IED blast, looked out toward Halberd like it had seen far worse men and survived them all. Still, there was a twitch at the corner of his scarred mouth. Not pain, not surprise, just a tightening. The kind you see in Marines just before they decide not to strike. "I said fire him," Halberd repeated louder now. "He's scaring the customers. We're trying to eat, not look at Kandahar's leftovers." William said nothing. He never raised his voice in that diner, but the silence around him grew heavier. A young server dropped her tray near the milk station. A spoon hit tile and echoed. The elderly couple by the fireplace froze mid-bite. A man with a Vietnam veteran's cap at the bar looked down into his chili like it could offer a way out. Then came the shove. Not from Halberd himself, he wouldn't soil his hands. It came from his assistant, a wiry man with too much gel in his hair and not enough soul in his chest. With S. "Didn't you hear the chair, Jay?" No one moved. Halberd sipped his eye. The assistant laughed. And somewhere William lay on the ground a moment longer than he needed to. Maybe to feel the cold. Maybe to feel something. Then slowly, he retrieved the pin first. Then the wallet that had fallen from his breast pocket. Then his hand towel. A few feet away, the jukebox clicked. Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash started playing as if irony had a soundtrack. William glanced around the room. No one made eye contact, not even the cook in the back who had once thanked him for his service. And then, across the room by the wide window where the snow-capped mountains stood like silent judges, a boy 8, maybe 9 years old, put down his grilled cheese and picked up a cell phone. He spoke into it in hushed tones, then looked at William, then back down again. His father returned from the restroom, a stocky man in a Desert Storm VA jacket. He followed his son's gaze, saw William, saw the coffee stains, the look on his face. He didn't ask what happened, he just took out his own phone. William turned back toward the counter. His denim shirt clung wet to his ribs. Coffee dripped from his elbow onto the floor. He didn't wipe it. "Hey, Wheels," the assistant sneered. "Don't forget to mop that up before you punch out." William didn't turn around. He just kept rolling past the fryer, past the pie display, past the regulars who had once thanked him for their freedom but couldn't spare a hand to help him up. He parked by the kitchen door, picked up another stack of napkins. His hands, though burnt and rough, folded them with the same care he'd once given to bandaging bleeding Marines under fire. And outside in the parking lot, the sound came again. Low, throaty, steady, the unmistakable growl of a military Humvee. It was coming up the road toward the diner, toward Liberty Corner, toward the man no one thought worth defending. Part 2. He saved my life once in Kandahar. Now I just watched him fall, and I did nothing. Opening hook. Dad, that's the man you told me about, the one who saved your convoy. The boy's voice cut through the silence like a whisper across a battlefield, soft but unforgettable. In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But for those paying attention, it was the first crack in the dam of indifference. If you're still watching, lean in. What happens next will make you question who you are when no one's watching. Would you have stood up or sat in silence like everyone else? Share your thoughts below, and if stories like this matter to you, hit that subscribe button. Because this is not just about William. It's about every veteran who's ever been forgotten. The boy's father, Michael Parson, froze mid-step. His coffee sloshed in the paper cup. He looked from his son to the man in the wheelchair, now wiping his chest with a soaked napkin. Coffee stains spreading like blood across the front of his shirt. His jaw clenched. That man, William Eugene Ashford, had once carried him half-conscious through a minefield in Kandahar back when Parson was a second lieutenant and too proud to admit he was in over his head. William hadn't hesitated, hadn't asked questions. He just acted quietly, decisively, and saved lives. Now that same man had just been shoved to the floor in front of a room full of people who did nothing. Parson looked around, eyes averted, phones out, pretending to scroll. A woman in pearls dabbed her lips with a napkin like none of it had happened. A man in a blazer whispered to his wife, who just nodded toward the door. No one moved. Parson exhaled slowly and set his coffee down without drinking it. Then he walked outside, took out his phone, and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Divine. It's Parson. Listen carefully. I need boots at Liberty Grill. No, I'm not joking. A Marine's been humiliated. You'll want to see this yourself. Inside, the scene seemed frozen in amber. William had returned to his post behind the counter, wiping down the bar with mechanical precision. He avoided eye contact. He didn't look angry. He looked resigned. But behind the glass window, something approached. The rumble grew louder now. Not just one engine, several. Tires crunching gravel. The unmistakable shadow of a desert tan Humvee slid across the tile floor through the window reflection. Melissa, the teenage waitress, noticed first. Her eyes widened. She dropped the water pitcher. Outside, 3 Marines stepped from the vehicle, each in full service dress. They didn't speak. They didn't smile. They simply straightened their jackets, adjusted their covers, and walked. Inside the diner, people started to shift in their seats. A nervous energy swept through like wind before a storm. But that wasn't all. Just behind them came another vehicle. Civilian. But out of it stepped a man with a state police badge on his belt and a small American flag pin over his heart. He didn't walk like a cop. He walked like a soldier, a retired one. Back inside, Halberd was still laughing at something his assistant said. He hadn't noticed the shift in the air. He hadn't turned. But others had. A man near the counter, bald late 60s, with a faded Vietnam vet cap, stood up. Quietly, silently. Then a woman at the back booth, Air Force jacket, early 70s. She stood too. The Marines entered. The leader, Master Gunnery Sergeant Ellis, stopped directly in front of William, who was still pretending to clean, Staff Sergeant Ashford Ellis said, voice like gravel wrapped in steel. William turned. For the first time, emotion flickered across his face. Shock, confusion, then something deeper. Recognition. Ellis saluted sharply. Permission to stand with you, Marine. William hesitated, then returned the salute. Slower, weaker, but no less precise. You always had good timing, Gunny William said, the corner of his lip twitching. The entire diner watched, breath held. Ellis turned to face the room. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice calm but commanding, we were told one of our own was disrespected today, physically assaulted, humiliated, and no one spoke up. He let the words hang. Let me tell you who this man is. This man pulled 4 of us out of a burning MRAP under sniper fire. This man shielded a 19-year-old private with his own body and lost a leg in the process. This man saved me, personally. Murmurs rippled across the booths. Then came the moment no one expected. Rick Halbert stood. Excuse me, he said with practiced arrogance. This is a private establishment. And I was merely exercising my right to express discomfort. His appearance was affecting customer experience. Wrong move. Ellis stepped forward, slow and deliberate, until he was inches from Halbert's face. You looked at a man's scars and saw ugliness. I look at them and see service. Halbert laughed awkwardly. Are you threatening me, Sergeant? I don't need to. You already did it to yourself. Melissa stepped forward from behind the counter. I saw everything she said, her voice shaking. He didn't say a word to you. Just took the abuse. You made him fall. I wanted to help. But I was scared. Ellis turned to her. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting anyway. She nodded. And then something no one expected happened. One by one, the other veterans in the room stood. The Vietnam vet, the Air Force widow, the Gulf War mechanic. Even Michael Parson returned and took his place beside the Marines. We failed you, Parson said to William. I failed you. But not anymore. The room was silent, but it buzzed with something stronger than noise. Respect. Ellis turned one final time to Halbert. This isn't your diner anymore. This is Marine ground now. Halbert, red-faced, turned to leave, but not before tripping slightly on the edge of the booth. The room didn't laugh. No one helped him. As he exited, Ellis looked to William. Gunny William said quietly, Was this your idea? Ellis shook his head. No. The kid called. The son of the man you saved. Said a Marine was down. That was enough. Outside, another Humvee pulled up. Inside, William sat straighter, taller. But not before a line of text appeared. Semper Fi means never alone. Ever. Part 3. William Eugene Ashford, Fallujah 2004. Bronze Star, one leg down. Still pulled 3 Marines to safety. Opening hook. They called him a freak, but the truth, he's a damn war hero, and we let him fall. The words struck like a gavel of judgment, not from a court, but from the conscience of every person still seated in Liberty Grill. If you're still watching, don't blink now. Because what's about to unfold will shake your sense of justice, your idea of courage, and maybe even your faith in silence. Stick with this moment. It's about to get loud without anyone needing to raise their voice. William sat still, the old leather of his wheelchair creaking as he adjusted his posture. For the first time since the humiliation, his eyes lifted to meet those around him. But he wasn't scanning the room in search of pity. He was looking for accountability. Master Gunnery Sergeant Ellis, standing tall at the center of the diner, turned toward the crowd and began to speak, not loudly, but with the kind of quiet intensity that commanded the soul. You've heard the name, but maybe you don't know the story. He pointed at William. Fallujah 2004. The sandstorm rolled in, thicker than smoke, darker than ash. Our convoy hit an IED cluster. Most of us didn't make it out of the first blast, but one man, this man, dragged 3 Marines through burning metal while sniper rounds sang over our heads. A hush fell over the room like snow. He lost his leg doing it, took a piece of shrapnel the size of a fist to the face. Still didn't stop. Carried a 4th Marine on his back with one arm steering his own bleeding body with the other. We didn't think he'd live, but he did. And then he disappeared. Ellis stepped closer to William, voice softening now. Until today. Behind the counter, Melissa dropped her pen. Her eyes brimmed with tears she didn't expect. She had known William as the quiet man who always folded napkins perfectly, who never asked for help with the coffee pots, who stayed late to sweep floors no one saw. But she had never known the cost of his silence. At booth 7, the man who had laughed earlier, the developer, was now shrinking in his seat. He reached for his water glass, hands trembling slightly. But it wasn't just shame settling over the room. It was something deeper, a growing realization, an unspoken horror at what they had allowed. Commissioner Rick Halberd, standing by the door with the pretense of dignity, cracking under the weight of exposed truth, tried to reassert himself. This doesn't change the fact that he made customers uncomfortable. Ellis didn't flinch. You're right, it changes everything else. Captain Marla Devine now stepped forward, her uniform crisp, her eyes sharp and unblinking. Her voice was clear, deliberate. Staff Sergeant Ashford received the Bronze Star for valor, not for surviving, for choosing to run toward fire while others ran from it. I was in the second truck that day. I saw the flames. I saw him go back in, twice. She paused, then pointed directly at Halberd. And you, who has never heard a shot fired in anger, judged his face before you asked his name. Halberd opened his mouth. No words came out. William, watching this unfold, felt something stir in his chest. Not anger, not even satisfaction, something quieter, like a flame rekindled after years of cold. Across the room, the elderly Vietnam vet who had stood earlier removed his hat and placed it flat on the table like a flag laid upon a coffin. His wife gripped his hand, her lips trembling. Then came the moment no one expected. The assistant who had shoved William stood up, eyes wide, face pale. He took a shaky step forward and muttered, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know who he was. Ellis turned to him slowly. You didn't need to know his history to treat him like a human being. The assistant's mouth opened again, but nothing came out. He sat back down, hard. Melissa stepped forward from behind the counter and quietly placed a clean folded towel in front of William. On it sat a fresh cup of coffee, black, no cream. His usual. You shouldn't have had to get back up on your own, she said. Not here, not anywhere. William gave the smallest of nods. Captain Devine turned to the room. This diner will not go back to what it was. Not after today. Not after what we've all seen. What we've all failed to do. And then in a single silent motion, she stepped aside and revealed what she had been holding behind her, an official Marine Corps commendation plaque, freshly engraved bearing William's name and the words, with honor for courage beyond duty. She placed it gently on the counter next to the register where customers usually paid their bills. I'd like this to stay here, she said, as a reminder, not of him, of us. One by one the patrons began to rise. Some came forward to shake William's hand, others simply nodded, tears in their eyes. Then a boy, Tommy, the same boy who had called his father, walked up holding a crayon drawing. It showed William in uniform, standing tall, saluting, with the words in block letters, My hero wears wheels. William looked down at it, blinked twice, and smiled. It wasn't big, but it was real. The first one in years. At that moment, a call came into the diner's landline. Melissa picked it up, listened, and held the phone out to William. It's the mayor's office. They want to apologize. William stared at the phone for a long second. Then, without a word, he reached for the receiver. But before he could speak, Captain Devine leaned in and whispered, "You don't have to say anything, Sergeant. You already said enough the moment you stood back up." He nodded. Outside, the Humvee engines rumbled again. Inside, the crowd didn't disperse. They lingered, they shared stories, they made plans, because what had happened in that diner wasn't just about one man, it was about all of them, about all of us. And as the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the weathered sign that still read Liberty Grill, something changed. Not just in the people, in the air. Because that day a veteran didn't just reclaim his dignity, he reminded a town how to remember. Part 4. Welcome to Ashford's Corner, where veterans eat for free. Always. Opening hook. We used to call him a ghost. Now he's the reason this whole town woke up. That's how Melissa described it weeks later when a journalist asked her what changed. And maybe that's the right word for it. Because for years, William Eugene Ashford was invisible. Just another broken man rolling quietly through life. But now his story had detonated through the town like a moral blast radius, and nothing, absolutely nothing, looked the same. If this is your first time seeing this story, go back. Watch what happened before, because what you're about to witness isn't just redemption, it's transformation. And if it doesn't move you by the end, then maybe you weren't really watching. The morning after the Marines walked into Liberty Grill, the front of the diner looked different. Someone no one admitted who had scraped off the old faded paint from the wooden welcome sign. By mid-afternoon, a new sign was up, bold letters stenciled in fresh black and gold, Ashford's Corner. Beneath it, where veterans eat for free. Always. It wasn't a gimmick, it wasn't for show, it was a promise. Inside, a brass plaque now hung permanently behind William's favorite booth. It read, "Reserved for those who served." And below it, framed neatly in glass, was the crayon drawing from Tommy, the boy who had called his dad. It had become the heart of the diner. People walked up to it like it was a memorial. Some touched the glass and whispered names of friends they lost. Others stood silently, heads bowed. William didn't ask for any of this. In fact, he resisted it at first. "I didn't do anything but survive," he told Melissa one morning, pouring her coffee while she tied her apron. But she shook her head. "No, William. You reminded us how to be human again." The changes spread like wildfire. It started with the diner. Then came the school. 2 days after the incident, Liberty High School's principal reached out to ask if William would speak at Veterans Day Assembly. He hadn't stepped into a school in decades, but something in Melissa's voice that morning when she handed him the letter made it hard to say no, so he went. And he stood in front of 600 teenagers in a faded dress uniform, one leg missing, his voice trembling at first but strong by the end. "You don't have to be perfect to serve," he said. "You just have to show up when it matters." He told them about Fallujah, yes. But more than that, he told them about coming home, about silence, about feeling erased, and about the power of being seen once more. When he finished, the auditorium was so quiet you could hear someone crying softly in the back row. Then, without a cue, the entire student body stood and saluted. It wasn't a cheer, it wasn't applause. It was solemn, sincere, reverent. After that, things accelerated. Local businesses began posting signs that read, "Veteran Discount Honored." But some took it further. A local barbershop offered free cuts to anyone who could tell a true military story. A mechanic gave discounts if you showed dog tags. A retired carpenter volunteered to build ramps for disabled vets who couldn't get out of their homes. At City Hall, things were changing too. Commissioner Rick Halberd, once untouchable, was now under investigation. A leaked video from the diner had gone viral not just locally, but nationwide. Thousands of veterans commented. Some recognized William's name. A few even posted old photos from Fallujah, one of which showed William carrying a wounded Marine across a dusty road under sniper fire. The backlash was swift. Protests outside Halberd's office, veteran groups demanding accountability, a former congressman even weighed in, "When you shame one of us, you shame us all." By the third week, Halberd quietly resigned, citing health reasons. William never once commented publicly. When asked, he'd simply say, "Justice doesn't need a spotlight, just space to breathe." Back at the diner, the Thursday night crowd had transformed too. What was once a quiet evening now became a tradition. Veterans from all branches and all generations began gathering weekly at Ashford's corner. Marines sat beside Navy men. A Bois-d'Outou paratrooper once told stories over pie with a young woman who'd just come back from Syria. There were no politics, no bragging, just stories, coffee, and respect. One night, something unexpected happened. A teenage girl walked in, nervous, clutching a notebook. She stood near William's booth and asked quietly if she could sit. "I have a project," she explained. "We're supposed to interview a living monument." And they said, "You were one." William blinked. Then he motioned for her to take a seat. That night he talked longer than he had in years, not about the war, but about the people, the quiet courage of those who didn't come home. The faces he still remembered, the silence he carried, the nightmares, the guilt, and how one day in a diner with bad coffee and creaky floors, he was reminded that pain doesn't have to be permanent, not if people choose to see past it. As she left, she gave him a hug. William stood frozen, arms hovering mid-air. Then slowly, awkwardly, he returned it. Outside, the sun was setting behind the hills. The light poured through the diner windows in warm gold. You could see dust in the air, dancing like memories. Melissa wiped the counter with a rag and leaned toward William. "Did you ever think you'd be the reason a whole town changed?" He shook his head. "I just wanted to serve coffee." She smiled. "Well, now you serve something a lot stronger." As the lights dimmed and the last table cleared, William looked at the plaque on the wall, then at the empty seats around him. He saw ghosts, yes, but he also saw hope. Because for the first time in a long time, the man who had felt discarded by the country he bled for was no longer invisible. He was the cornerstone, the corner everyone built around. Part 5. Some scars scream louder than words. His just happened to wear a uniform. Opening hook. They tried to erase him with one sentence. But scars remember what people forget. The brass plaque glinted in the soft morning light, catching William's eye as he unlocked the front door of Ashford's corner. The smell of fresh bread and worn leather hung in the air. Outside, the wind rustled the American flag above the doorway, and the town of Garrison, Texas, slowly stirred awake. For most, it was just another Thursday. But for William Eugene Ashford, it marked 6 months since that afternoon, the moment he was shoved to the ground, publicly humiliated, and ultimately seen. If you've stayed with this story till now, thank you. But don't blink, because what happens next might be the quietest moment and the one that matters most. Since the diner was renamed, it had become more than a place to eat. It had become sacred ground. Veterans came not for the food, but for the silence between stories. Families brought their children to meet a man who had once disappeared into America's blind spot and returned as a mirror held up to its soul. People cried, people listened, some healed, and William, once just a name in a forgotten file, had become something he never asked to be: a living monument. But not every monument stands without cost. Commissioner Rick Halberd never returned to public office. After the viral footage and mounting pressure, he resigned quietly. But he did not disappear. 2 months after stepping down, local news reported he had checked himself into a veterans' trauma clinic, not as a patient, but as a volunteer. A former VA administrator later revealed that Halberd's own brother had served in Iraq and died by suicide 5 years after returning home. The shame he projected onto William was the guilt he never faced. Sometimes cruelty is the mask that regret wears. William never commented on the news. When asked, he simply replied, "We all carry something. Some of us carry it louder." The plaque remained. That winter, William received a letter, handwritten, no return address. It read, "I can't undo what I said, but I hope one day I find the kind of strength you showed by standing back up. Thank you for not hating me." There was no signature, but the handwriting was familiar. William folded the letter and placed it inside the sleeve of his old uniform jacket beside the ribbon from Fallujah and a photograph of his unit, half of whom never came home. Weeks passed. The diner thrived, but William remained quiet. Then one afternoon, as the golden sun draped across the windows and cast long shadows on the floor, a young man stepped inside. Fresh haircut, stiff posture, nervous hands clutching a cap. "Sir," he asked, his voice barely audible. "Are you Staff Sergeant Ashford?" William turned from the counter. His eyes softened. "Yes." "And you are Private Carter, sir? I ship out tomorrow. My dad said I should find you." William motioned to the booth beneath the plaque. "Have a seat, soldier. We'll talk." They talked about fear, about duty, about not needing to be fearless, just present. William's voice was steady, patient, like a river that knew every bend. Carter listened like his future depended on it. Before the young private left, William gave him a simple piece of advice. "Don't fight for medals. Fight for the guy next to you. That's the only thing that matters when the dust kicks up." That night, Melissa found William sitting alone in the booth. A quiet stillness hung around him. She refilled his coffee and hesitated. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. He smiled just barely. "I used to think I had nowhere else to go. Now I realize I'm exactly where I was always meant to be." Outside the town continued its quiet transformation. A new Veterans Memorial Park was being built just 2 blocks down, funded by donations from townsfolk who had once looked the other way. The high school invited William back regularly to mentor students, and every Thursday night that corner booth was never empty. But perhaps the most powerful moment came not from a ceremony or a newspaper article, but from a child. Tommy, the boy who once held the phone and called for help, returned one evening with another drawing. This time it showed the diner. In the window, a wheelchair and a coffee mug. Above the door, Ashford's corner. He handed it to William and said, "Dad says heroes don't always carry guns. Sometimes they carry stories." William looked at the drawing for a long time. His hand trembled slightly. Then he reached out and pulled Tommy into a hug. It was then and only then that Melissa noticed something new about William. He was smiling, not the polite, practiced curve of the lip he had worn for years, but a real smile, full, peaceful, full us, and perhaps that was the most heroic thing of all, not the battles he survived, but the dignity he rebuilt in the face of silence, cruelty, and erasure. Now, I'll leave you with this. How many veterans do you pass each day without knowing their story? How many William Ashfords are out there sitting in diners, folding napkins, walking with a limp, or riding a bus in silence? And what would happen if just once you looked them in the eye and said, "Thank you," not just for their service, but for surviving everything that came after? Because in a world that moves too fast and forgets too easily, maybe the quietest people are the ones carrying the heaviest truths. And maybe, just maybe, the most sacred kind of strength is choosing to stand tall, even when the world tries to shove you down. So before you go, let me ask, will you stand with those who never stop standing for you? Comment, respect. If you believe no veteran should ever feel forgotten again, and if this story moved you, subscribe for more. Because this isn't just a story about William Ashford, this is a story about us, all of us.